So bending the IoT to your will with blockchain, which I thought was very important because as we're all going through these changes right now, and sometimes we feel like we're at a standstill, technology is still improving and increasing and hopefully helping us through these times. So I thought it was really ideal to talk about things that maybe we can, maybe leverage now or later on, especially what we've learned the past few months and probably the rest of the year. So bending the IoT to your will. My name again is Angeleen Wilson. I am a blockchain engineer. By day, I work in media, which I'll go through briefly about who I am, what I do. And I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. If you're in Atlanta, hey. If not, that's fine. I'm on the Eastern time. It's probably early or late for you if you're not. So just going through what we're going to go through in the next 30 minutes. The agenda is to talk briefly about the blockchain. If you're not familiar with it, or if you are, that's great. IoT, what is that? Identity and connectivity, which is important for IoT and blockchain, and then go a little bit under the hood, just a little bit more of the scenarios of using IoT and blockchain with identity and connectivity, and imagine what we can do and what we are doing with it. And then I'll go through some current use cases, and then if we have time, some Q&A. So who am I? Angeleen Wilson, again, live in Atlanta, a little bit north of Atlanta, Georgia. I am a mom of a 5-year-old. I'm about to have a baby in November. So baby girl, so I'm very excited about that. Like I said, we're all going through some changes. Well, my change is having a new baby. I am the director of Georgia Blockchain Coalition, and the reason why I created that was I felt like in 2018, it was very important to connect communities, businesses, and really amplify the best education possible and awareness so that people feel like they have the right resources and accesses, that they get more familiar with the technology and they want to use the technology, whether it's personally or in business. I do help host the Women of Blockchain of Atlanta, partner with General Assembly each month or each quarter right now. Gian was a special guest on our last event that we had last month. I am part of the lead in Women Who Code of Atlanta, and really just the phenomenal community of support of women and men and allies that really help support these women in Atlanta. Again, going back, my day job is in media, work in radio as an application database developer. I do help host the Atlanta Blockchain Week we have each year, which will be virtual this year in September. And a passion project of mine is called School Apps, and building centralized applications, particular ones that may help schools really adapt not just to blockchain, but help, really record reality of data a little bit better using the technology, so that way there's more relationship time as opposed to so much paper and tracking of information. So let's get started. So bending the IoT to your will with blockchain. What's the blockchain? If you think about it, it's a distributed database. If you're familiar with the technology, you probably have heard of the white paper, the peer-to-peer, which it is an electronic cash system, which started as the infamous Bitcoin. And that really gave the name for blockchain. There's a lot of distributed ledger technology, as you're aware, out there. This one sort of helped give awareness of what we can do from a transaction standpoint with monetary value, taking away those banks, those fees that align with how the banks control our information, and which they also call the digital gold, the first cryptocurrency. And a lot of people always think Bitcoin and blockchain are the same. Well, blockchain created Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, so you can have blockchain without cryptocurrency, but you can't have cryptocurrency without blockchain. And there's so many other ways of using blockchain. A lot of people are more familiar with Bitcoin of being a value of transaction of money. However, it's really the value of information, data, for example, that can be used in different ways. Just going a little bit about the attributes of the blockchain: open source, peer-to-peer, which means we're using our own devices, using as pretty much like servers or nodes to be able to compute information and communicate off each other's devices, as opposed to having a traditional client server that we use normally as a traditional server, which is more controlled by a central authority, which has become why people that believe in blockchain is, the new wave of recording our data, is giving less control of one entity and giving it more to the devices that we can control our own data a little bit more feasibly. It's permanent, unalterable. You'll hear immutable, but unalterable just means that once that data is recorded, you can't take it off. You have to add new rows of information to be able to update the accuracy of maybe something you're trying to record for a certain digital asset or information. Self-ownership, going back to that, taking that central server, that central authority and control of your information, you're able to control how the transactions are leveraged between devices and where it goes. Identity management, the security of using encryption, it gives more of an autonomous feel in your security and give you more control again to your ownership of how that data is being iterated across devices. And it's in real time, as autonomous as it can be in syncing information. I always tell people you have a debit card. You may have something that goes through your bank, and based off the limit of the amount that could be 500,000, maybe more than that going into your bank, it could take a few days to post and you'll see that pending. However, with blockchain, for example, transaction of money or transaction of value of certain types of data, it can take just a little less than 10 minutes to post and have that finality that you're looking for, as opposed to, for example, a bank that takes sometimes days to give you the final, final assurance that they have that information in their system. IoT. So we hear a lot about that, Internet of Things. It's the network of physical objects, and it connects us with certain internet connectivity that we're using now and communicating between devices so that these objects are obviously going back to the internet enabled, can communicate and collect information according to how they're built. So I want to just do a little bit of a what if, and then we'll go through some more what ifs later, but just think about IoT and building the benefits of what blockchain and IoT can do in reducing costs, for example, taking some of those fees from those central servers that we use, for example, banks, accelerating transactions and using these two types of technologies of convergence together, and reducing risk of tampering, because again, blockchain is recording the reality of data. IoT is being able to collect it through their technology devices. Again, a little bit more about IoT. You're familiar, we're all using our iPhones or our smartphones, or using our computing devices right now to be able to get on this session. Smart fashion, which I learned a lot about earlier this year, and RFID tags, which I'll go through, and being able to look at the authenticity of certain type of fabrics that are being used. So it's not saying that it's not this real authentic cashmere as opposed to it being fake. Identity. I thought it was really important to go through what identity is and how it is important to be able to leverage IoT and blockchain and how the possibilities could be, and if something that you wanted to build or build with a team with your company. Manufacturing a component, for example, or a coffee bean, for example, you're enabled in being able to attach information to it as an asset throughout the longevity of its life cycle. It's providing a tangible asset with its unique identity, which you would give with IoT, and record it through that particular technology. But as easy it could say to be as solved, it really isn't. There's a lot of pieces that go in, which we'll go through. But the example I'd like to give on identity is food. We all eat it, we all enjoy it, we all consume it. But just to give you an example in providing the necessary information and how important IoT and blockchain can be, especially leveraging IoT, is the necessary data we would need, for example, if we bought fish and we decide I don't want a whole fish to buy, I just want a part of a fish. However, we need to make sure that through the supply chain, we're building the identity to be able to track where these pieces of food is going. And the problem is not necessarily straightforward, especially like I said, if it's not bought whole and you're only opting for a part of that fish, you're still being able to build an identity and saying, where is this piece of one whole food is going, so that as it changes form, I'm still being able to understand if something, not to say goes bad with the fish, but you're being able to track through the technology of IoT and record it with blockchain, in giving some type of way to feel assurance that we have some type of auditing track in case, fortunately, a batch of food, which does happen in a lot of countries, that is not necessarily, maybe you can get people sick, foodborne illnesses. We're able to take identity of information, for example, through IoT, and record it through blockchain. Medicine, we all hopefully have accessibility to it and providing ourselves if we need it, especially right now. And how do we be able to track information if we don't have the identity of where it came from or how it was created and who's responsible for it? And so I thought in an identity, for example, especially with IoT, because there is cases of fraud on if this medicine is suitable or it is actually something created for the purpose of what it's needed, through those capsules that you use, and being able to have like a certain type of tracking code for this medicine. And as complicated as it seems, it is important because it is a tangible asset. It is something you're using and touching. So providing that in a shape or form so it doesn't change as it changes hands, you're able to tag that information, print it through the label or a sensor, because there are some chemical signatures that you need to be aware of, or the doctor's aware of as they give it to you through the prescription through a pharmacy. Connectivity. Again, we're going to go through a little bit more with identity and connectivity, but just want to give you what that exactly is, especially with IoT. The QR. We're all probably familiar with the QR. I just mentioned smart fashion, which is used heavily in carrying some type of information. That's a unique identifier that you get to scan. Say like you're going through a grocery store, going back to that fashion market, or connecting, for example, of your unique identity through LinkedIn and you want to connect with somebody through your smartphone. These are simple RFID tags. They seem cheap and straightforward, which they are. They're also passive, which means somebody has to heavily rely on doing the lifting of taking your information, for example, going back to using your phone to make sure you're able to scan these certain tags, which they are, and be able to install it through the transaction like a supply chain to carry your identity across other devices. And that's what's capturing the information. Sends the data to some location where it manages the data off that particular asset. For example, your identity. When you consider lots of items moving across the globe, which happens every day, especially now, it's easy to see where something could fail. And so nothing's perfect in technology. We as humans build it. However, how can we build the best efficiency is leveraging the technology we know that works, and that is IoT and blockchain, and which creates a more sophisticated way of being able to actively tag assets, whether it's tangible or digitally. Sensors. We capture information about food, for example, going back to what I just mentioned, and the location, the temperature of where it came from, especially if you're testing new environments, testing new sicknesses, for example, and testing your own food. It's just very important that we know that we can use these devices and be able to have more control of it, of where these cloud services are storing it. What I mentioned with QR, again, they're tags. It's feasible. The cost battery life is a little questionable. We're still, as you see with IoT, there's still a lot of work to be done in regards to battery life, or how these devices can use from a long-term standpoint without costing so many IoT devices having to be produced. And the size of these actual assets, a particular value, can be justified as a solution, which they're working on. If, again, we're talking connectivity, these can help answer a lot of the use cases, which I'll go through at the end, but not just solve problems, also cut costs as things such as the supply chain are created and needed. Just to give you a little bit, again, going back to connectivity, of something I saw was interesting with IBM. If you're familiar with Hyperledger Fabric, as a sensor, building out a node, you have an API connection. And there's something that, if you're familiar with Kubernetes, and creating a container of your data in a secure fashion, but you're also being able to leverage Hyperledger. If you're not familiar with it, that's okay, a blockchain, and using location through these sensors to not necessarily replicate, but to store and to talk between different nodes, peer 1 to peer 2, for example. And as someone orders or has some activity from this sensor, they're still able to connect from location A to B, as you see in this diagram, through a container such as Kubernetes with the trust of Hyperledger Fabric, a blockchain, and recording that reality of data where the permissions are only contained within a certain service, a cloud service. And that's where, the great thing about blockchain, there are ways you can set up and saying, I want this to be permissioned, which means, again, going back to Hyperledger Fabric, it's in a contained, isolated cloud service that only certain people have permission to. But it's also accessible to these devices, these sensors, so that way certain devices or the replication of devices that are being built, particularly for this technology, can still be used throughout possibly the globe, for example, through food and medicine. So just keeping it simple, going back to what I just mentioned with identity and connectivity. Think about the value of assets that justifies the effort that needs to be taken for these physical digital tags. For example, clothes, food, or medicine. Is it feasible? Are these connectivities feasible? Does it make sense to really take this technology forward? And in a lot of ways it does, which we'll go through. And the intelligent automation, the AI, which is also possible with the convergence of these other technologies. All right, just mentioned, AI as well, so I call it the collective. We went through identity and collectiveness and connectivity. Again, going back to what blockchain is, distributed database, which is recording the reality of data. AI, with the algorithm of data, is suggesting what you can do with that data, and IoT is collecting that information. So as you can see in this diagram, data is everywhere. How are we going to do it, and how are we going to leverage it through these intelligent technologies that we're already creating today? So we talked about identity, we talked about connectivity, we talked about the convergence of IoT and blockchain technology. So what if, which is already happening today, what if we're using and leveraging blockchain, which is the deterministic, unalterable, permanent, and using cryptography, encryption to record the reality of data through certain algorithms? And how is it going to help be utilized through health and medicine, which I sort of went through with the medicine, and wearing IoT devices, for example, as possibly a smart healthcare device. There's a lot of smart healthcare devices, such as your Fitbit, that's giving you collecting information. Well, how can we use this to record your physical activity so maybe it can help benefit and make suggestions for you for now or for the future in case something you're not aware of, but the doctor can collect for you and help give you a better plan for your health. This is just a simple diagram of where possibly, I put this on purpose, a vaccine, for example, enabling, again, IoT, your activity, the smart wear devices, and collecting and storing that information through what they call a healthcare transaction on the blockchain, of recording that information, not being able to alter it, so it's recording real information from your possible physical activity or your activity, for example, as a child getting a vaccine, taking and recording that information through medical records so that your family or who has permissions is aware of this information, and then being able to take suggestive capabilities. I know we were just talking about IoT, but I thought AI was also really important to understand what we can do beyond that with these convergence of technology, and be able to suggest and recommend based off the previous activity of what was just taking place, for example, a vaccine or some physical activity somebody was recording, and where we can go with it. Food, like I said, we all eat it. It's very important for us. We all have these devices that we try to look up certain things. We want to know what we're eating. And how are these consumers more aware? Well, obviously, like I said, Googling information, being aware of certain types of food that may or may not be good for you. But the impact of what IoT and blockchain can do as the core part of the technology in the global distribution, as well as the traceability, is to be able to help maybe avoid the impact of health problems, what you're eating, how much people are eating it, maybe something we're not aware of that maybe these distributors are not aware of what they're distributing out to consumers. Changes in behavior towards health or healthcare, and suggestions, for example, the CDC are making, and how, again, we're more conscious, we're more accessible to data through, like I said, looking up information, not just on ourselves, but what trends are out there in regards to health and how to be more involved with the food quality, packaging, as well as processing that IoT and tagging food can do in tracking where this food's going. For example, foodborne illnesses is very important, impacts a lot of people when it does happen, and how we can make sure we leverage the technology so it doesn't happen as often or at all. And which I'll go through at the end is, again, going through the quality as a consumer wants to be aware of the crops that are being not they may not know where the farmer got the crops or where they harvested, but they want to know, okay, is this going to affect me if something does happen after I consume it or before I consume it? So we talked a little bit about human food, but what about pets? Some of us have pets, and again, that's very important because a lot of grains, a lot of crops are heavily invested in making a lot of the food safety, and I thought that was important to understand because we love our pets, and it is just as important in regards to understanding what IoT can do as anti-counterfeiting, not just for human food but also pet food, getting the best nutrition for our pets, RFID identification that I just mentioned, and the accuracy of being able to track your product and verify where it is through these devices that connect and collect this information that blockchain can record. And it also, again, tamper proof and improving the security, improving the management, and taking away sometimes the lack of auditing and putting it in as an automatic auditing process with blockchain to record the information. So again, keep talking about food. Pregnant, so I guess it's been on my mind. You have more control of what you eat. You're more aware. Consumer awareness is very important these days, and the conditions of where food came from and where it comes from. And this, again, going through some supply chain of what if IoT and blockchain work conversely through maybe all food industries, is where the input of providers, where the farmers are getting and harvesting the crops, where they're taking it to the aggregators, how they're processing it from where the harvest was, sending it as distributors for wholesalers and restaurants, and into these retail stores that these consumers get it from. And as you can see, what's going on now with blockchain, how we can store it, utilizing, again, recording the reality of data, and then hopefully with AI suggesting the best practice as we collect this information. Connecting cars, I thought, was a great piece as an example with IoT. It's becoming more and more popular to be able to connect as a Wi-Fi within your own vehicle that's automated when you buy it, that it provides a feature for that, and being able to maybe safeguard you from maybe your own behavior, like some insurance does. My mom got a device connected to her car for 3 months, so she got a lower insurance, which I'm glad she did. I was worried about her driving, was monitoring how she drove and what she did and her behaviors. And with that IoT, it collected that data. They took that data and they stored it to make a decision on her evaluation for her insurance. And this happens more often. And then again, going back to smart Wi-Fi, how they're manufacturing and how they're building for the safety of the consumers, and then the security of the data that are being used, because we don't want everybody to know where we're going when we're driving, but it will help us in the behavior that we're maybe making the right decision in how we're driving, and possibly if we're giving the permission through the vehicle of where we're going, it's setting the tone of maybe for as a consumer of how popular things are. Maybe there's a traffic in the way, or maybe there is, unfortunately, there is a hazard of sorts, and something is shut down because of that. We want to be aware of that as we're driving somewhere as a connected car. So on the blockchain communication with a connected car, if you're not familiar, smart contracts, that's fine. It's where you are able to autonomously agree through peer-to-peer, person-to-person, and make a transaction and a payment. And where this connected car comes in, on-chain, is being able to leverage, again, going through the security, maybe making your awareness of, as you go through a toll, purchasing your accessibility onto a certain road. Or, for example, in the future, if we're able to take these certain devices within the car that's already built in as an IoT, we're able to record information, feel secure about it, and it connects to our wallet, for example, as we're going through, for example, gas stations, or it's leveraging us, maybe if we're going on certain road trips, for example, as a connected car. Off blockchain communication, some people are not as familiar with it, but it helps contain for certain providers that are maybe connected with a connected car that's being built for this infrastructure, to give a geolocation of sorts, and it be able to message you of where certain charging stations, like I mentioned before, of there's a parking space. For example, I went to a movie theater and it told me where I could park. Now, it didn't tell me because of my vehicle, but if my vehicle could do that, how much more progress could I make in my schedule? With one child, now I'm going to have two. So planning ahead, my vehicle could help me do that through the IoT, through the Wi-Fi, of connecting that information. I've been able to record that as my behavior, or maybe something that AI could suggest what I can do in the future with my kids. I just want to give you an example of, for example, these connecting cars, Tesla Model 3. If you're not familiar with it, it's electric vehicle charge. Again, going back to those charging stations, maybe your vehicle as a connected car can tell you where the next connected vehicle is. But imagine if, as a way to leverage, for example, I mentioned Bitcoin in this, and being able to purchase, again, look at things from a purchasing ability through your vehicle. A lot of people don't want to get out right now. How can we, leverage things through the trust of what we can connect maybe our pay wallets to in our vehicle? We're still going to open that window, give somebody some information about how we want to pay, but what if there's a way that we can leverage certain technologies such as IoT and these models such as Tesla and its vehicle electronic enabled structure, and being able to take out certain things that we do with our hands and being able to ledger it autonomously through the vehicle as a connected car. Here are some examples. Honda and GM Electric, going back to the smart grid of what blockchain can do and recording the reality of somebody's behavior through their driving, maybe for their insurance or where they're going, or maybe for just a standard of our safety in vehicles. BMW, for example, and Volkswagen are doing the same thing. And if you're not aware of it, Ford in 2019 stopped making sedans, and they're putting over 100 patents that they applied for in autonomous vehicles, and that all applies to IoT. But imagine what we could do with the data if we feel secure enough that we can record for blockchain for our own purposes. Here are some use cases that are used and enabled already with blockchain and IoT. If you're not familiar with any of these, that's fine. But Chain has a huge catalog of what they now do through these tags, these microchip sensors, in a wide range of wine, food, and high designer bags, for example. If you're familiar with Louis Vuitton, again, going back to smart fashion, they are being able to leverage, again, the authenticity through these tags, like your literal tag, as almost like a QR, to be able to make a transaction as you purchase and verify that it came from where this designer bag said where the materials came from, for example, so it's not counterfeit. So they've invested heavily in being able to provide the best enablements of IoT through devices, again, going back to trackers and microchips, and recording that information so that way you're able to track with blockchain of where that wine was created, distributed, and possibly that designer handbag that you have on where it was actually created, that you entrusted that why you bought it, and use it to this day. Wanted to make sure, I know I'm probably 5 minutes till, but I wanted to see if there's any questions. I'll try to rush, but if you do have any questions, let me know.
Yep, there are a couple of questions, Angeline. I just jumped in to help you take them. So there's a really interesting question from Rashmi. Just let me scroll a little bit. Yeah, as a newbie to IoT and blockchain, what would be the best place to start at?
I'm very, I guess coming from enterprise, I am I guess I'm very biased to looking at enterprise-friendly, technology or ways to go. Going back to Hyperledger, Fabric, which I'll add some resource links to this presentation. I wanted to go through that, but I know I was already starting with so many slides. But I'll definitely share this, and I'll send some through the presentation. Hyperledger Fabric has a lot of resources on where to get started with IoT and blockchain. Not just blockchain, but going back to that diagram that I shared, IoT as well, and how you can look at the infrastructure, for example, a sensor, and understand the connectivity of what an API can do with going to CouchDB and holding this data, but also going a step further in how you can leverage Kubernetes as well and containing the data, controlling it just one step further with blockchain, the Hyperledger Fabric network that you can build through Hyperledger. I want to say IBM, as people not aware of, IBM not necessarily owns the technology of Hyperledger Fabric. They support it. And that's, again, a big plus for me because I know there is a huge enterprise that you can get resources from. They're not just going to go away tomorrow. They are heavily invested in making sure that this is accessible to developers, whether you're working on something within your company. And if you're not, like I said, they're heavily giving you all these tools accessible and free. It's just a matter of going in and taking those information, and I want to say self-taught, but they give you a lot of training, I guess, as you will, readings and sort of training modules to be able to get you where you want to go from there. And like I said, I'll add that as an extra slide for a resource link. I know I had a lot of slides. I was like, let me see how much I can get in 30 minutes without overwhelming y'all, because I could keep talking. But I'll definitely add another slide with some of the resources that I discussed.
Awesome. Yeah, everybody has mentioned in the chat that they loved your simple examples. So that's not a question, just want to put that across. There's another question, interesting question. How are you planning to solve the Oracle problem? The data you would like to track with blockchain still needs to be inserted into the computer. This is always at some point touched by a human.
Yes. So like I was going back, humans are making technology, so it's always going to be imperfect. So we're just trying to always, iterate, but then, upgrade what we've learned that didn't work, right? And that goes back to the internet. We couldn't have blockchain with the internet. We learned the internet communicates well with us, but it doesn't store information in the best secure way, right? So it would obviously be in the hands of the eye of the holder, right? And going back to that Oracle of being able to store information, going back to that Kubernetes, that's very important. I really liked how IBM illustrated that because it's being able to contain certain pieces of data that only certain people have control of, and separating certain, I want to say, like, you can build different nodes that have access to certain pieces of data. Well, Kubernetes can help do that and leverage recording information through blockchain through that Hyperledger Fabric network that I discussed. It's just being able to have the right architecture and only have certain hands in it to where there's certain permissions. Obviously, there's a policy in place, and being able to create it in a way where that data, almost like a data lake, is accessible in a container. Again, going back to Kubernetes, if that makes sense, to where, like I said, you're structuring it purposefully to where there's certain pieces of information that only certain permission admins or users have at any given time. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think that does. Yeah, I mean, I also agree with this fact that we can't really replace humans because humans are the ones who are building the technology, but it's probably just adding that extra layer of security as well as bringing in that trust factor without having to pay a lot to intermediaries to establish that, but instead have the algorithms play that role. But then again, we need humans to write the algorithm, so human intervention is always going to be there.
Yes. Yes. Any other questions? I know we're pretty much over time, but I want to make sure, or like I said,
I think that's about it. Yeah.
Okay. And you can reach me. I'm on Twitter at datmom.com or datmom. On Twitter, on LinkedIn, Angeleen Wilson. Happy to answer any questions. Like I said, I could talk about this for days. So if there's something that you may have missed while I was trying to get it all in 30 minutes, feel free to reach out to me. I'll also put my email address on here real quick.
Thanks a ton, Angeleen. I would really, really like to thank you for taking your time and basically trying to help the community understand the link between blockchain and IoT. And probably for those who are not familiar with blockchain as such, just introducing the topic to them. This was great. I really enjoyed your session. And thanks a ton, everybody, for joining us, whoever could join us today for the session. And yeah, please do join our WWCode blockchain track as well if you want to learn more about blockchain.